Welcome to our deep dive into a fascinating interplay of theology and modern politics, exploring how Calvin's ideas sort of echo through today's conservative rhetoric.
Absolutely. It's like really intriguing how ideas from 16th century Geneva still resonate today, right?
Exactly. It's like um, you can trace this journey from Calvin's cold, relentless logic about predestination and divine order straight to, yeah, political ideologies, especially in the American right.
Definitely. And what really stands out is that while Calvin's ideas were about a chosen few being blessed, that's evolved into a modern narrative separating the deserving from the undeserving.
Right. It's like this core idea, which originally delineated God's elect versus the damned, comes into play with the dualism we see today, the winners versus the losers, the patriots versus,
Yeah.
the traitors.
And when you factor in the prosperity gospel, it really hammers that point home, saying if you're wealthy, you're essentially proving God's favor, right?
Exactly. And it gets even more interesting. The prosperity gospel kind of adapts Calvinist logic. We're talking about wealth being a sign of divine blessing, while poverty signals lacking faith.
Yeah. So it becomes a justification for anti-welfare policies and like tax cuts for the wealthy, doesn't it? It's not just about economics, but about moral hierarchy.
Yeah, it's a moralized form of capitalism where big business is seen almost reverently as those blessed or chosen to lead. You see it in corporate immunity debates, for instance, where companies are the new moral agents.
Absolutely. Right. And that leads us to another core element, the idea of the elect versus the enemy. Calvin taught that those outside the faith weren't simply mistaken, they were in rebellion. And now, that's morphed into how some political factions view their opponents.
Exactly, it's like a political rendition of divine warfare. You've got narratives where the left is painted as not just wrong, but as an enemy, almost evil.
Yeah. I mean, look at the rhetoric. The left hates America. They're godless, which morphs a theological divide into a cultural and political battle.
Right, that's precisely it. And it's really unsettling how this belief in being the elect can stop any kind of dialogue. It creates an us versus them dynamic, where compromise is basically seen as surrendering to an enemy.
Absolutely, I agree. A thought here. While many argue that using such strong moralistic language only pushes people further apart, isn't it a bit of an exaggeration to equate all political disagreements with, like, spiritual warfare?
That's a fair critique. I mean, not every disagreement is cataclysmic spiritual war, but when leaders use quotes such as facts don't care about your feelings or invoke religious identity in a hierarchical way, it definitely draws on that Calvinist, rigid logic of moral absolution.
Yeah, right. And speaking of that, the example of political figures like, Mike Pence or Ron DeSantis, it's like their statements reflect that age-old narrative, dividing people into the righteous and the damned.
True, it's almost poetic how some of these reforms mimic the structure of early Calvinist thought. Pence's assertion of his Christian identity and DeSantis's confrontation of woke culture both reflect an underlying notion of divine order, albeit secularized.
Absolutely. And that's where the whole discussion of law, order, and moral certainty comes in. Calvin's Geneva enforced strict laws. Everything from blasphemy to dancing could be punished. Today, that same mindset underpins debates on issues like abortion, LGBTQ rights, even school curricula.
Exactly. It's like this almost obsessive drive for moral purification gets recycled into modern-day punitive policies like over-policing or mass incarceration, each justified as a means to enforce a moral standard.
Yep, exactly. It really makes you ponder how deeply those historical ideas are embedded in national identity and policymaking. The notion of enforcing a strict moral order, even if it's symbolic today, seems to be a persistent thread.
Yeah, it's fascinating how that tension between celebrating law as a moral safeguard versus, the necessity of flexibility in a pluralistic society plays out. Because when you truly believe you're the chosen, compromise pretty much becomes unthinkable.
Absolutely, yeah. And that inflexibility, in turn, feeds into a kind of tribalism, where any deviation or alternative viewpoint is labeled as not just wrong, but essentially evil.
Right. And this is where you see um, moral absolutism take center stage. When political and social policies are so deeply intertwined with a sense of divine destiny, every debate becomes a battle of good versus evil.
Exactly. It's a stark contrast to more nuanced approaches where, well, there might be room for compromise or understanding. Instead, there's this rigid dichotomy. Like, you're either with us or you're downright against us.
Yeah, it's like an all or nothing mindset. And think about how this impacts policymaking. It's no wonder that discussions over issues like welfare or corporate
Right,
regulation
absolutely.
are so polarized.
One thing that really catches my attention is how this entire legacy of Calvinism in politics seems to have a self-reinforcing nature. Once you're perceived as elect in moral or economic terms, there's little incentive to listen to opposing viewpoints.
Yup, it basically leads to a closed loop. It's like if you believe you're already chosen, any dissent is not merely a difference of opinion. It's a sign that the other side is inherently flawed or even wicked.
Yeah. And that, indeed, is a bit perilous. It creates an environment where dialogue is hampered, and policy becomes about validating identity rather than solving problems on a common ground.
Exactly. It forces issues into a zero-sum game where every concession is seen as a betrayal to a supposed divine mandate.
Right? Exactly. So, reflecting on all this, it seems that this historical legacy has shaped not only the way policies are devised, but also how campaigns are run. It's almost a blueprint for modern political theater.
Yeah, it's like we're watching a play where the script is written by ancient theological concepts, and today's leaders are, well, the actors performing these roles.
Right. But wouldn't you say that's also a bit limiting? I mean, relying on such a rigid framework might spark passion, but it could also blind political communities to the nuances of today's challenges.
That's a critical point. There's a risk that this borrowing of Calvinist doctrine deepens divide, making error and compromise virtually
Right on.
unacceptable.
And in a rapidly changing society, that sort of thinking, while it provides certainty, might actually hinder progress by shutting out alternative voices.
Precisely. It's like an inherited rigidity that over time loses its adaptability. When you're locked into a mindset of moral absolution, every nuance gets flattened into a binary, chosen or damned.
Exactly. So, when we trace the lineage from Calvin to modern political articulation, it becomes a mirror reflecting both the historical depth and, unfortunately, the challenges of inflexible ideologies in a diverse society.
Yeah, and I mean, it begs the question, how do we move forward in a way that acknowledges these influences without becoming beholden to a framework that's,
Right, that's the million-dollar
too
question.
rigid for our current landscape?
Exactly. Maybe like a rethinking or modernization of these ideas, one that factors in compromise, complexity, and the realities of pluralism, could serve as a bridge.
Yeah, it's almost like we need to evolve our mythos, retain the lessons on discipline and order, but, also embrace flexibility and mutual understanding.
Absolutely, yeah. In the end, whether it's through theology or politics, the goal should be fostering community rather than division. It's a tough balance, but recognizing these underlying historical influences is a step in the right direction.
Well put. It's a rich, complex legacy that challenges us to reconsider how history folds into our present, guiding us or perhaps cautioning us against the pitfalls of extreme moral certainty.
Exactly. And that's what makes these discussions so, vital. Thanks for diving deep into these layers with me.
Anytime. It's been a fascinating journey from 16th century Geneva to today's political battlegrounds. See you next time as we unpack more of these deep-seated legacies.